Most people today assume underwear is a basic human necessity, as essential as bread, as universal as shoes, as obvious as breathing. But that belief collapses the moment you look honestly at history. For nearly 1,000 years, the majority of women in medieval Europe did not wear underwear at all. No panties, no bras, no lace, no cotton briefs hidden beneath their dresses. And this wasn't because they were ignorant. It wasn't because they were poor. And it certainly wasn't because they were less civilized. In fact, once you understand why medieval women avoided underwear, the modern obsession with it begins to look deeply unnatural. Something doesn't add up. Because medieval women worked long days. They walked constantly. They menstruated without modern medicine. They gave birth repeatedly. They lived without antibiotics. Yet historical records show no epidemic of the infections, rashes, chronic irritation, or gynecological disorders that plague modern women today. So what changed? Why do women now need layers of fabric pressed tightly against one of the most sensitive biological systems in the human body, when women in harsher conditions survived without it for centuries? This is where the story gets uncomfortable. Because the real answer has nothing to do with modesty, and everything to do with biology, hygiene, power, and control. Let's start by breaking a dangerous assumption. We imagine medieval clothing as crude, dirty, and unsanitary. But that's a projection of modern arrogance, not historical reality. Medieval women typically wore long linen shifts directly against their skin, loose, breathable, washable, designed to absorb sweat and protect outer garments. Linen, unlike most modern fabrics, is naturally antibacterial. It dries quickly. It allows airflow. It does not trap moisture. Underwear as we know it today, tight, layered, elastic, form-fitting, would have been a biological nightmare in a pre-antibiotic world. Trapped moisture equals bacterial growth. Constant friction equals micro-tears. Warm, enclosed environments invite infection. Medieval women understood this intuitively. They didn't need microbiology textbooks to know that the body functions better when it can breathe. So instead of underwear, the shift served a different purpose. It was removed and washed frequently, often daily for wealthier women, weekly for peasants. It acted as a sacrificial layer, keeping sweat and bodily fluids away from expensive outer garments. And most importantly, nothing constricted the genital area. No elastic bands, no seams cutting into flesh, no synthetic fibers sealing heat against the skin. Which raises a disturbing question. If underwear is so necessary, why did women thrive without it for centuries? To answer that, we need to stop romanticizing the past and start interrogating the present, because underwear did not become widespread due to health. It became widespread due to social restructuring. Before the late medieval period, clothing was functional, designed for climate, labor, and bodily needs. But as Europe moved toward rigid class systems, religious moralization, and patriarchal control of female bodies, clothing began to change. Underwear slowly transformed from function to symbol, a symbol of modesty, a symbol of discipline, a symbol of containment. By the late Middle Ages and into the early modern period, women's bodies were increasingly viewed as dangerous, sinful, and in need of control. The solution wasn't education. It wasn't healthcare. It was restriction. More layers, more structure, more rules about what a woman's body should look like and how it should behave. And underwear fit perfectly into that system, not because it helped women, but because it helped regulate them. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Before underwear became a tool of control, it had to overcome one major obstacle: the female body itself. And biology does not negotiate. In the next part, we'll investigate how medieval hygiene actually worked, why tight garments were biologically dangerous, and how modern cleanliness quietly created the very problems it claims to solve. Because the most frightening truth isn't that medieval women didn't wear underwear. It's that modern women might be suffering because they do. To understand why medieval women avoided underwear, you first have to abandon a modern myth that hygiene means more layers, more products, more barriers. In the medieval world, hygiene was about management, not suppression. Women bled, they sweated, they discharged. They gave birth at home, often repeatedly. None of this was hidden. None of it was considered shameful in the way modern society frames it. The female body was not sealed away behind elastic, plastic, and perfumed cotton. It was allowed to function. And this is where biology enters the investigation. The vaginal ecosystem is self-regulating, but only under very specific conditions. It requires airflow. It requires moisture balance. It requires temperature stability. Disrupt those variables, and the system collapses. Modern underwear, especially tight-fitting styles, violates all three. Elastic restricts circulation. Synthetic fibers trap heat. Multiple layers create constant humidity. In a world without antifungals or antibiotics, that kind of environment would have been lethal. So medieval women avoided it, not consciously through science, but through generational knowledge. If something caused infections, pain, or infertility, it disappeared from daily life. What survived was what worked. Loose linen shifts allowed fluids to evaporate. Gravity did the rest. Walking and movement promoted airflow. The body cleaned itself. This wasn't primitive. It was adaptive. Now compare that to the modern fixation on dryness and containment. Pads, panty liners, absorbent underwear, all designed to trap what the body is trying to expel. And when the body reacts, itching, odor, imbalance, we call it a problem and sell a solution. But medieval women didn't have recurring feminine hygiene issues as a category, not because they were cleaner, but because they interfered less. This leads us to another uncomfortable truth. Underwear didn't enter women's lives because of health. It entered because of shame. As religious doctrine tightened its grip on daily life, the female body became morally suspect. Menstruation was rebranded from a natural process into a symbol of impurity. Female desire was reframed as temptation. Exposure, even accidental, became scandal. So, clothing changed, not for comfort, not for function, but for moral signaling. Layers multiplied, silhouettes stiffened, bodies disappeared beneath fabric. Underwear became a moral boundary, a physical reminder that a woman's body was something to be hidden, managed, controlled. And once that boundary existed, it could be exploited. Corsets compressed organs, petticoats restricted movement, underlayers multiplied heat and friction. Women adapted by enduring. Pain became normal. Discomfort became virtue. Silence became survival. By the time industrialization arrived, underwear was no longer optional. It was mandatory. Mass-produced textiles replaced linen with cheaper cotton. Then synthetics. Then blends optimized for profit, not biology. Elastic was introduced. Standardized sizing replaced body variation. Tightness became fashionable. And suddenly women began experiencing problems medieval women rarely described. Chronic yeast infections, persistent irritation, unexplained pelvic discomfort. Medicine responded not by questioning clothing, but by medicating symptoms. The system never asked the obvious question, what if the problem isn't the body, but the environment we force it into? Because when you strip the issue down to its core, underwear does one thing extremely well. It keeps women constantly aware of their bodies, of moisture, of smell, of leakage, of perceived imperfection. That awareness is profitable. It sells products. It sells insecurity. It sells control disguised as care. Medieval women didn't monitor themselves like this. They had no mirrors inches from their skin. No marketing reminding them they were unfresh. No daily rituals of concealment. They dressed to live. not to correct themselves. And this is where the investigation turns dark. Because once underwear became normalized, removing it became unthinkable. A woman without underwear is now labeled careless, unhygienic, improper. The same society that causes imbalance demands constant correction, and most women never question it, just as most people never questioned modern bread, until someone asked why ancient people ate it daily without getting sick. History doesn't lie. It waits. In the final part, we'll expose how modern culture reframed underwear as empowerment, why discomfort was sold as femininity, and what happens when women quietly break the rule again. Because the most radical act isn't rebellion. It's remembering what the body already knows. By the time modern society began calling underwear empowering, the damage had already been done. The shift was subtle, but irreversible. Discomfort was rebranded as elegance. Restriction was reframed as refinement. And endurance became femininity. Women were told that layers were protection, that tightness meant support, that concealment meant cleanliness. And because the message came wrapped in progress, few questioned it. Industrialization didn't just mass-produce underwear, it standardized it. Bodies stopped being individual ecosystems and became sizes: small, medium, large. Elastic didn't adapt to women. Women adapted to elastic. What had once been loose, breathable, and forgiving became snug, structured, and unforgiving. And the body responded exactly as biology predicts: inflammation, imbalance, chronic irritation that medicine still struggles to treat. So treatments multiplied: creams, suppositories, washes designed to correct what never needed correcting. An entire industry was built to manage the consequences of one assumption: that the female body is inherently dirty unless contained. But here's the paradox no one likes to confront. When women quietly abandon underwear, even temporarily, many report fewer infections, less irritation, more comfort, not because they are rejecting hygiene, but because they are restoring it. The body stabilizes when interference stops. Which explains why medieval women, without products, prescriptions, or protocols, managed conditions modern women are told are inevitable. This isn't nostalgia. It's pattern recognition. History shows us something uncomfortable. When clothing followed biology, women adapted with ease. When biology was forced to follow fashion, women paid the price. And yet, modern culture resists this conclusion fiercely. Because underwear is no longer just fabric. It is identity. It is morality. It is expectation. A woman without underwear is now suspicious. But history tells a different story. For centuries, women lived without it. Not recklessly, not ignorantly, but intelligently. They dressed for function, for climate, for movement, for life. And somewhere along the way, we forgot that the body isn't a problem to be solved. It's a system to be respected. This doesn't mean everyone should abandon underwear tomorrow. That's not the point. The point is awareness. To recognize that what we call normal is often just recent. That discomfort is not destiny. And that the past may hold answers, not because it was better, but because it listened to the body instead of silencing it. The most unsettling truth isn't that medieval women didn't wear underwear. It's that modern women were never asked whether they should.